Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the best history channel on the internet. Yes, this is the Stick Figure Historian, and okay, that's just dumb. Seriously, guys, I gotta work on an intro. Or maybe we just need to keep it short and simple. Whatever, let's just get going. Welcome back to the next Texas episode of the American series. Today, we're going to talk more about the new dictator of Mexico, Santa Anna. Now, Santa Anna had been popular with many of the people of Mexico for his various military feats and strong leadership. They had thought Santa Anna was a federalist, and they had been happy under that form of government. But now that he was in power, everything was changing, and freedoms began to disappear. Not only had he taken away the Constitution of 1824, but he also declared now that the smaller governments of the provinces must stop meeting, and that they must get rid of all their militias. Only Santa Anna and the Mexican military would rule the nation. And so his popularity began to dwindle, and many of his old followers turned against him. They didn't want a dictatorship. The provinces of Oaxaca and Zacatecas were foremost in this. They polished their swords and cleaned their rifles for battle, determined to stand to the last for federalism. Neither were successful. And Zacatecas, in particular, met only with the cruel punishment of the new dictator's wrath. Santa Anna allowed his troops to sack the capital city there for 2 days, killing all who they pleased. The wicked commander was responsible for 2,000 lives at the end of it all. It was ruthless, but it worked. After this, the Mexicans were afraid to fight against him anymore. Not the Texans, however. Agustin Viesca was the governor of Coahuila in Texas. When he heard Santa Anna's orders to shut down the local governments, he simply refused to obey them. In fact, he went even further and arranged to have the local officials meet in the town of Bexar instead of in Saltillo, since it was farther away from the Mexican army. Which, actually, if you were traveling through the area, you wouldn't find a town called Bexar anymore. Now, it's called San Antonio, the second biggest city in the biggest state. Although, Texas isn't the biggest state, I guess. Alaska's actually quite a bit larger. But they're still big. And San Antonio's even got the big Tower of the Americas to prove it. Well, I guess it's not that big if you're talking like the One World Trade Center or something. But hey, it's bigger than the Space Needle. Although, if you ask me, this giant rooster is infinitely more cool. You know, I have to say, I don't really get the everything's bigger in Texas idea. Maybe it's just the size of the state? I know they're not the biggest, but they are pretty big compared to everyone else. Anyway, Viesca got the seat of local government moved to Bexar, but sadly, he was arrested on his way there. Yet, Viesca's story was not swept into the darkness of his prison cell along with him. The news of what was afoot in Texas carried across the winds of hearsay to her neighbor, the United States. American newspapers all over the country were soon printing the tales of Santa Anna's mistreatment of the governor. The paper said it would be better for Texas if she were independent. they began to influence the minds of American men and prepare them for what was coming. For, you must remember, the government and many wealthy Americans had set their sights on Texas for decades now. They began to see in this disturbance the perfect chance to make their strike and stake their claims to the land, without the interference of Mexico City in their businesses. But we return to Texas. To Anahuac, actually. For things were ado there that draw our attention again. Instead of runaway slaves and imprisoned lawyers, the issue this time was over tariffs. It was June 1835. There were tax protests in the streets, and some of the ship captains were claiming that the tariffs were not being enforced equally at all the ports. One of the leaders loaded his ship with nothing but ballast, just to mock the Mexican commander there. Which, just to explain a bit, ballast are just weights that you put in the bottom of a ship to balance it out and keep it steady. People would use rocks, bricks, heavy stuff like that. Today, a lot of ships actually fill little cavities in their holds with water for ballast. And then when they need to lighten up to come into port, they let the water out through little holes in the sides. Pretty cool. So basically, this captain here just loaded up his whole boat with a bunch of rocks, just to stick it to the Mexican commander. And, the commander didn't take the humor very well. He threw him in the slammer. And in the turmoil of the arrest, one of the Mexican soldiers shot at a young Texan and wounded him, thus only adding to the problem of public anger rather than quieting things. Enter William Barrett Travis, the young lawyer who we met in this seaport town 3 years ago. Well, he had been released from prison and acquitted of his charges of insurrection, and had gone on with his life as usual. As usual, that is, until word reached him of the new trouble brewing in Anahuac. He could have simply joined in the local gossip over the news, and after a little chat about how bad things were getting with the Mexican government, moved on with his life. But something about this struck a chord with Travis, and he couldn't ignore it. He too had been a prisoner there, once. He determined to take action. 25 men volunteered to follow Travis and rescue the 2 tax protesters. They snatched someone's boat off the pier of Harrisburg and sailed straight to Anahuac. Somehow, they managed to gain the surrender of the Mexican troops there. A force of 40 men. Why would so many surrender to so few? Well, I suspect that the Mexicans were afraid that if they tried to fight with Travis, the local people of Anahuac would rise up and attack them in the rear. Whatever the case, the 2 tax protesters were brought home in triumph that day, and Travis had made his second stride into fame. The local Mexican officers demanded that Travis be handed over to them for trial as a rebel. But the colonists looked upon him as a hero now, and they refused to turn him in. Travis did make a public apology for his actions later, however. He realized he had acted rashly, and was afraid that Stephen Austin, still a prisoner in Mexico City, would suffer for his exploit. Stephen was none the better or worse for what Travis had done. He was actually released the very next month. But we can't say the same concerning Santa Anna. His dream was to become another Napoleon Bonaparte, that great emperor-general of Europe. And had not Napoleon's first step towards downfall been the disintegration of control in the outskirts of his realm? The Texans were still assembling militias, still calling their own government meetings together. They were clearly demonstrating a desire for independence. And surely the overeager United States wouldn't waste an opportunity to help them and add the territory to its own rapidly growing empire. And if he lost Texas, what next? His other border territories would be at risk as well. And if you look at a map of the United States, he wasn't too far from the truth, folks. Santa Anna was a worried man. And as we saw at Zacatecas, when he became worried, he became ruthless. In September of 1835, Santa Anna ordered his brother-in-law, Martin Perfecto de Cause, to depart with 500 troops for Port Capano. His orders were to keep the peace in Texas at all costs. After his little stay in Mexico City, Stephen Austin had no more love for Mexican ways, and certainly no more love for Santa Anna. They were all useless to him now. It was time to fight to be his own boss, to be his own independent impresario. He called upon the Texan people to organize themselves for defense.